Not sure if this qualifies, but little background here. We live in a nice, new, the oldest house is like 10 years old, solidly middle-class Midwest US boring neighborhood. Of the 150 plus homes here, everyone's nice to each other, except one family, naturally my neighbors. I could go on and on with years worth of bad neighbor stories, like stealing our electricity, or mowing the lawn at 1 a.m., or their kid smashing in our mailbox right in front of me. But this is a creepy thread, so... When they were finally evicted, these crackheads who had been without basic utilities for months in the summer left behind the most awful scene I thought I'd ever see. Inside the house, they had not only torn out every wall looking for copper wiring, had stripped every fixture, sold every appliance, but they'd also stopped using the bathroom. There were feces everywhere. But that's not the worst of it. One of the police officers and I were friendly with each other, and since we'd called the cops about a dozen times against these people, he let me take a look inside. The stench was nearly overpowering. You see, in the hallways, in closets, in the basement, were the corpses of countless small animals. These people bred dogs for a while, and so that's what we assumed were these poor dogs' rotting carcasses, literally everywhere. How people live like that, I'll never know. Meth, I guess. This happened when I was at a friend's house a couple blocks from mine. I was about 16 at the time. Me and a few friends were hanging outside a school just down the street from where he lived. It was around 11 p.m., and we were sitting underneath a streetlight in the school's parking lot. A few kids about 10 or 11 years old, accompanied by a kid about our age, passed the school, probably 40 feet from where we were. We didn't think much of it, but it was kind of strange to see at 11 at night. We just went back to what we were doing. About 5 minutes passed by, and a group of 4 or 5 guys, about 18 or so, are running past. They slowed down, and one of them yells over to us and asks if we've seen a group of kids nearby. We just answered with a quick no and went back to what we were doing. They walked over to the school sign, which is about 80 feet from us. There they stood, just acting like they were hanging out. We didn't think much of it, but after a while, we started heading back to his house. We noticed that they were looking at us as we were crossing the street. We hurried and got back to his house. We were kind of weirded out by it, so we thought we should probably just lock up the house. We were all hanging out in his living room. About 2 minutes after we got back, his front door started shaking and the doorknob was moving. We all looked at each other like, is this really happening? Then there was banging on the door. I peeked out through the window onto the porch. Sure enough, there was one of those guys from earlier, standing there ramming into the door. We had no idea where his friends were, but we all grabbed things to defend ourselves just in case any of them were to get in. One of my friends went to his kitchen to check his patio door. The guy at the front door ran off the porch. We went into the kitchen thinking maybe he was going to try the back of the house. It was just a glass sliding door after all. We waited and waited. For nothing, he left. I have no idea what the guy's intentions were if he would have gotten in, who he was, nor why he followed us back, and why none of his friends seemed to be with him. But thankfully, none of them ever came back. But it was one heck of an experience. Neighbors moved in across the street from me when I was in middle school. They were very odd people that kept to themselves. It was obvious that they had two small children that were adopted. One day, not that long after they moved in, the lady came over and apologized to my parents that her kids were always screaming and crying. I remember it being really strange because neither my parents or myself ever really heard the kids screaming or crying. Not soon after that, my father was home and he heard the lady screaming in her backyard. He went over and she was screaming that she found the younger of her two children unresponsive in the backyard. Police arrived and unfortunately, the kid is dead. Then things get real. Tons of cops, unmarked vehicles, police lines. I watched a movie in middle school. Turns out she beat the kid to death and tried to stage it like the kid fell and hit his head on the back patio. Then we find out much more. Our new neighbors moved out their last house because they weren't welcome in the area, because numerous previous neighbors reported them to Child Protective Services for abuse. We find out it was literally a local news story in the area they lived in. Now, this is in the 1980s, before the internet, and all that, so you could hide your skeletons much easier back then. They only lived across from us a few months before this went down. Pretty shitty story. Oh, and one more thing. The murder charge or investigation revealed that children weren't even legitimately and legally adopted. They were basically purchased.